So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This is the penultimate webinar in our 2021 series for PROMS-G, and we're really delighted to have Gary Lloyd as our speaker tonight. He's going to talk about how to cultivate change from a project perspective and why it's better to be a gardener and green-fingered and not a mechanic. So just before we get into the meat of the presentation, I just want to make a few little announcements. So next month is our last webinar of the season. So that's happening on the 23rd of June. And the topic of that is, do you have what it takes to become chartered? So that's really just a look at how you might progress to the next step of your project management career. And that's with Rebecca Fox, who's the Director of Membership at APM. So check that out on our website. It's not there yet, but it will be in the next few days. So you'll be able to register for that. And we'll have more talks coming up from September onwards. So do make sure that you check back and have a look at the website. And that's the PROMS-G BCS website. So at the end of this webinar, you'll get an email with a link to a really short survey, which only take about 2 minutes of your time. That gives you the opportunity to tell us what you thought of the presentation tonight, and also, really importantly, to tell us what you'd like to see in future presentations. So we take that really seriously. That's really useful feedback for us as a committee in helping us shape events for you. So do please take the time just to complete that. As I say, it should only take a couple of minutes. So just before we start, I want to do a really quick poll just to see where everybody is in the world. So I'm going to launch the poll and I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to complete that, and then we'll just have a quick look at the results. It's just a little fun poll just to see where everybody is. So here goes. Oh, okay, great stuff. Lots of people in the UK, not surprisingly. Some in Europe, some in North South America. Excellent. Okay, that's brilliant. So I think I'm going to stop now because 91% of you have actually voted. So let me just end the poll and share the results. So as we usually get, most of you are in the UK, but actually it's great to see that some people are outside the UK and are able to dial in and share with us. Okay, fantastic. So let me give you a little bit of an introduction to Gary. Gary started his career as a civil engineer, but then he moved very wisely into computing, where he worked as a programmer. He's worked in retail banking as an IT programmer, but then he started to move into the business side of IT, where he did an MBA at Warwick Business School. And now Gary helps organizations make sustainable change using a variety of approaches, including lean project management, design thinking, behavioral science, and program management. So a really nice mix and a nice way of looking at projects and change. So that's all I wanted to say as my introduction to Gary. He's going to tell you a lot more about this topic, and I hope it's going to be a really great session. And I'll see you at the end. Gary, over to you. Gary, I think your mic is muted.
Oh, good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming along. I was just saying that there's no elegant way of sharing your screen on these things. So excuse me while I get up my material. Oops. Sorry, it's just something getting in my way at the moment. Here we go. There we go. So I'm going to talk about a project perspective on the theme of gardeners, not mechanics, which is drawn from my book, which I published by stealth in January and have gradually been promoting. But I specifically in this session want to talk about projects and how that relates to projects. And I'm going to ask for your input on quite a lot of things. And I hope you'll participate in that. Oops. So the agenda is I'm going to talk first about what projects are for. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. I'm then going to talk about the project delivery context. Is it a machine or is it an ecosystem? And if we've got time, and I hope we do, I'm going to give you some thinking tools to help you work through that. Now, I'm going to be using something called Mentimeter to get your input. And there are a couple of ways that you can interact with that. You can either open up a second browser window, or you can, there is an app that you can download, but you can open up a second browser window, or you can use a device like a mobile phone. And on that, all you have to do is when you go to menti.com, you put in this code that you can see at the top of the screen. You don't need to give your email address or anything like that. So you don't need to worry about confidentiality, and you'll be able to contribute through that screen. You'll also be able to say whether you like what you see or don't like what you see in here by giving a thumbs up. Somebody has done it there, and we'll see the numbers come up in the bottom there. You can say, yeah, I like it, I don't like it. You can even give it a heart. The other thing is that when in the second device that you're using or the second browser window, you can ask questions through that. And you'll see the questions, when you ask the questions through Mentimeter rather than the chat, but in the bottom right hand corner, there's like a speech bubble. And what we'll all see together there is the number of questions that are pending. And then I can click on that and I can open up the questions and go through them in the main screen. So if you've got questions, if you can at all, please do that through menti.com. Rather than through the chat. A good example, thank you somebody for posting a question there. So this is how this would work if you've got a question, and they get stacked up from slide to slide. And there you go, it's a test question, it will come up here, and then as I answer them, we go through, I can go through them. So that's a good way of doing it. So if you ask questions as you go along, periodically, I will stop and try and answer questions. Alongside that, Morris is going to keep an eye on the chat for me, and if there's anything burning, he's going to cut in and let me know. So let's just try this out and start with an easy question, which is, are you a BCS member? And as you can see, bottom right hand corner, we see how many people have voted so far. I know there's about 20 odd people on the call last time I looked. So it looks like of the people that are paying attention, the majority are BCS members. If you've got this on, then I'd be really happy if more people contributed. The next question is whether you're a project manager or something else, and that will help us all together understand what the audience looks like. Now, when I ask some of the subsequent questions, I'll be able to segment the answers that we get. Not on all of the questions, but on some, be able to segment them. Okay, well, thanks very much for that. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? So that's telling me, unless I'm misinterpreting that, we're in the project management specialist group, but actually only 35% of the audience are project managers, would classify themselves as project managers, and the others are salaried, 50% other salaried, and 20%, roughly 19% it says, freelance. So that gives us a feel for the audience and how you might answer some of the other questions. Now, Morris has talked about some of this already when he did the intro, but I thought I should talk about my dark past and how it relates to to project management. And I've made myself some notes in case I forget something. But as Morris said, I did a degree. My first degree was in civil engineering way back in 1980, which was in Roman times for the younger of you. And we did a project management module on my civil engineering course. And what that taught us to do was to draw Gantt charts and to draw PERT diagrams. There was no supporting software. In those days, if you wanted to run a computer program, you did it by punching cards. So there was no desktop computing, so there was no MS Project and no PMW, if anybody's old enough to remember that. And then I was a programmer from 1980 to 1987. So it was 7 years I was programming. And the reason I refer to that as my dark past is it's not something I've talked about a lot since, because after I did my MBA and crossed over to the business side, if I said that I'd been a techie actually developing software, then I would get dismissed as somebody that was technical doing a little bit of business, rather than what I wanted to be, which was somebody on the business side who was technically literate. But when I left programming, I joined NatWest before it was owned by RBS, and I joined an internal consultancy group. And part of our role, I meant to say about the programming, there was no project management. We just used to write software. We would sit down with the people that were our users, and we just used to write software. And we tended to do it incrementally. We'd do a little bit, is that what you want? And they'd go yes or no, and we'd change it, and we'd do a little bit more. And then we'd change it again, and then we'd get to the end product. And nobody even worried about how much this stuff costed. It was just a cost of doing business. Now, when I got to NatWest in 1987, I joined this internal consultancy group. And one of the jobs there was to introduce what was known as project management. And actually, this was something from IBM called MAD-P, Managing the Application Development Process. And the idea of this was that you would have a project definition document at the beginning of the project, which would define the scope, the responsibilities, the risks, the issues. And then you would have a phase definition document, and then you'd have another phase definition document, another phase definition document. And part of my job was to go around NatWest telling people who'd been developing systems for ages that this is how they now needed to manage their projects. I also got involved in doing some estimating models for how long software projects would take. And I escaped from all of that to do an MBA at Warwick Business School. I was sponsored to do that. I don't know how I talked my way into doing that. And then I got my wish, and I came back on the business side in retail banking. And I got that job on the basis that I knew about project management. Actually, I didn't know a lot about project management at that stage. So I did what I always do in these circumstances, which is I went out and bought a book. And I read the book and I said, yeah, I kind of get that. I think I know all that stuff. And I went into my new job, and the new job was a program of work called Core Process Redesign. And I inherited 12 projects. Each of them was at least £1 million. Bear in mind, by now, this is 1994. Each of the projects had a big IT content in it. They were at least £1 million each, and there were 12 of them running simultaneously. And I was supposed to go in as the deputy to somebody. When I arrived, I found that the guy that I was going to be working for had moved on to another job. And so on my first day, he sat me down with a spreadsheet with these 12 projects. Each of the 12 projects had a cost, and it had a cost saving, an FTE full-time equivalent headcount of the amount of work that would be saved if we did each of these projects. And at the bottom, there was a number which was the per annum savings if all of those projects were done. And he said to me, this is all fine and easy. All you've got to do is to see that through and deliver that number at the bottom right-hand corner of the spreadsheet. That's what you're going to be judged on. And off he went. And the next day, somebody came up to me from what turned out to be the Boston Consultancy Group and said, Gary, can I have a word with you? I said, yeah, sure. You know, this is going to be an easy ride. And she said to me, about half the projects that you've got are absolute duds. They're not going to deliver the savings that are there, and they're going to lose money. And I was like, oh, okay. Now, at this point, she's an external advisor. So I go back to the guy I'd inherited this from. And he said to me, what's the problem? So I told him what the problem was. And he said, well, it was all fine when I left. Now, that was the beginning of my project management education. I'll come back and explain how that's relevant in a bit. But I knew really nothing about that was apart from theoretical about project management. But over the next 3 years, thanks mainly to the Boston Consultancy Group, who are not known as a project management consultancy, they're known as a strategic consultancy, I learned a heck of a lot about project management, and a lot of what I'm going to say tonight, I learned in that 3-year period in a 4-year program that I ran subsequently. So that's my dark past. And the thing about savings is really, really important, because some of the questions I'm about to ask you touch on the subject of value. Now, people can debate what value means, so I'm going to give you the definition that I'm going to use. So at the most basic terms, value is, in my terms, the benefit divided by the cost. Now, that could be financial, but it might equally be customer satisfaction. We used to measure customer satisfaction. And cost could be monetary cost, but it equally could be a scarce resource. Now, if you want an abstract version of it, then the abstract version would be a need that's been met divided by the resource required to deliver it. But the quick way of thinking about it is benefit divided by cost. And the reason I've shown you a Rolex there is the value is in the eye of the beholder very often, because a question would be, is a Rolex more valuable than, say, I don't know, a Seconda, for example? Well, it depends on what the benefit is to you versus the cost. So if you want to tell the time, then the benefit of telling the time, the value of a Rolex you might consider very low, because you can get another watch that provides exactly the same function. So a Seconda might be of higher value to you. However, if you want to show off your status or your wealth, then the benefit of a Rolex is that you can show off that status. Therefore, it's got a higher value for you. So value benefit divided by cost. And the reason I'm talking about this is simply because I'm going to ask you a question now, which is, how do you measure, you as an individual, how do you measure project success? And if you go over to Mentimeter, there's a ranking that will allow you to do that. So put these in order for me. I think we got up to about 20 votes on the last question, so I'm just pausing to let the last few come through. Okay, so this is really interesting. So the benefits come through ranked as first, with the specification. Oops. Oh, values just jumped up. I've got a question coming in, and I'll deal with that in a sec. Okay, benefits and then value. It's kind of interesting that benefits has come out above value, I think, because the benefits are, it might just be the way I framed the question, but value, if you take my definition of value, it's the benefits divided by the cost of delivering it. So the benefits coming out top is saying irrespective of the cost, really. And the specification coming out third. I'm just going to have a look at what this question said here. Some of the benefits are low cost. Well, that's a very interesting debate. I would tend to agree with what that person said. So let's get back on this. So let's ask the next question. It's a very similar question, but it's slightly different. What is the role of project management? Okay, we're just about there. And this is an echo of a debate I had on LinkedIn in the days when you used to be able to have debates on LinkedIn in one of the project management groups there. And my contention was that it's the responsibility of the project manager of project management to deliver the expected value. There's no point, I argued at that time, to do what the majority of people here have ranked top, which is to deliver the agreed specification and say that it's somebody else's, implicitly that says it's somebody else's responsibility, not project management, to deliver the value or to deliver the benefits. Now, I would argue that delivering the benefits, or more importantly, delivering the value, is absolutely the key role of project management. It's part of the project. The project exists, I would argue, to deliver value. That's why it exists, not to deliver a specification. And I think that one of the things I've seen over the time that I've been in project management is that project management has become much more process orientated. It's become much more about ticking boxes rather than delivering value. If I go back to the story I was telling earlier on, what happened in that situation with half the projects being duds is that I was taught that you could kill off projects and create, if you're running a program, and create new projects, because what I was being measured on wasn't that particular list of projects was each delivering that headcount saving. It was the number in the bottom right hand corner. Nobody was going to read what the projects were. What people were really measuring me on was the value that I delivered, not the projects that I delivered. If you follow me, not the specific named projects. They didn't really mind as long as we saved the money at the end of the day. And I think that's a role of project management. I can see I've got a couple of questions, so I'm gonna stop here for a moment. I think that's a debatable point, and if we've got, we'll see. I'll see how the time is going, and maybe we'll get a couple of people on the mic to talk about that. But I want to go on a little bit more before I do that. Well, I totally disagree with that. There's somebody who said that? Sorry, that sounds like a challenge. But if the person that said that wants to jump on the mic, I'd be delighted to hear why you think that's the case.
Yeah, hi, it's Stephen here. It's just my experience that in a big project that I worked on, it was part of a larger program. And as my role as project manager, I actually appointed a benefits realization manager who took on the responsibility of kind of monitoring the benefits of the project after it had finished, and was actually embedded in the business. So it's just an observation from my own. I'm not challenging you, I'm just speaking from my experience.
Now, Stephen, what I wanted to do with asking these questions was to get a debate around it, because the part of this whole webinar really is a challenge, and I know, having been in project management for so long, I know that how things are often seen, and what I'm very happy to have the debate, because to me it's a little bit of a crisis for me in the project management community, because I know that a lot of people believe that the job of project management is to deliver the specification, if possible, within to time and to budget. But what I want to challenge the project management community with this evening is to say, look, we as a project management community should be thinking about delivering value and making benefits realization part of the project, making value realization, more importantly, as part of the project. So that's what I'm advocating, and I know people have a different view, and that's absolutely fine. That's how we move forward. So and Stephen, thank you for jumping on the mic to contribute on that.
No problem.
I'll mention Agile in a bit, not in great depth, but we can get into it in a debate if you want. I think I'm not sure how true that is, because you know, on that program I was talking about, some were what would now be called Agile, and some were what you would call waterfall, because they were just big mainframe projects and it was very hard to do it any other way. And we did have the project manager was always responsible for delivering the benefits. And what that means is that's why we're talking about gardeners, not mechanics, tonight, because if the project manager sees her or his responsibility as delivering value or delivering the benefits, then the project manager has to worry about the context for delivery and the complexity of that context. But let's move along. Well, the question is, whose responsibility is that? Would be my response to that question. Okay, let's keep going for now. So, in your experience, what proportion of projects deliver their expected value? And we'll get a segmentation between the project managers and the non-project managers here. I'm going to wait till it gets up to close to 20 votes on this. Okay, so the view from the collective wisdom here is that overall, what's that, 77%? Is that right? Did I get it right? 77% of people think that projects deliver 50% or less of their expected value, which is a pretty dire situation. Now, if you think it's not the project manager's responsibility to deliver the value, then you might not be too worried about that. But if you're one of those that thinks that the responsibility of project management is about delivering value, because projects exist to deliver value, then there's something that's going wrong. And that's really the topic of what I'm talking about this evening. Now, looking at it, we've got those numbers. I think I can flip them into percentages. Yeah, here we go. So the bottom two, I don't know if you can see my cursor, the bottom two are the project management people, and the others above. I don't think there's not a great difference, is there, between what people think. People generally think there are two people that think that most projects deliver their expected value, but on the whole, we agree that it's a pretty poor record, which helps me out because I don't have to bombard you with lots of independent surveys that show that what's reflected there is indeed the case. So this is the last question on this kind of segment about project management and what's it for, is which project managers do you think get asked back? Are they the ones that are known for being on time and on budget and delivering the specification, or those that are known for delivering lasting value? Wow, you know what? I really didn't expect this answer. I am really, really, truly shocked. The places that I've worked, which has mostly been banking and financial markets, the people that get asked back are the people that are known for delivering lasting value rather than being on time and on budget. It's what the project achieves. And I would suggest to the audience that if the majority of people think that being known for being on time and budget is better than being known for delivering lasting value, then clearly we have a problem with projects, and that might go some way to explaining this, because who's worrying about the value if it's not the project manager? So still on the topic of value, I know it's going to take time to answer this. I've come up with 10 projects that I hope most people will know. My apologies to people outside the UK who won't know about the vaccine program here, or probably the London Olympics. Just if you don't know, don't vote. But I've asked, what I'd like to see is what your view is of whether these were achieved by incremental change or big bang projects, and whether they delivered lasting value or short-lived or no value. And I know that there are other projects that we could put on here, but I've tried to stick to ones that would generally be well known. So I know it's going to take you time to get through this on Mentimeter, so I'm just going to sit back and watch the results come in. Just in case it's not apparent, the where the bubble sits is the average of where people have voted. And if what I can do, as you'll see, as we start to get up towards 20 votes coming in, I can get the dispersion. I can show you the dispersion of those. Okay, so we're nearly there. So we're nearly there. So if I go through, so what's this telling us? So we've got a cluster which is lasting value coming from incremental change. We've got lasting value coming from big bang projects, this quadrant here. And we've got big bang projects that didn't deliver lasting value down there. So let's take a quick look. Now what I can get a dispersion on this. So if I go on number one there, we can see, whoops, that's how people voted. So you can see there's quite a big dispersion there. So some people think that the vaccine development was actually incremental change, and there's a bunch of people that thought it was a big bang or big bang-ish, and some people thought the vaccine development delivered no lasting value, which is quite interesting. I think the vaccine development is a really interesting project because the mRNA vaccines were developed in about two weeks, and the rest of it was testing, essentially clinical trials. And I think it's arguable that the vaccine was developed through lots of small initiatives, and we all see it differently, but I would be siding with the people that were up in that rather thought that it was, although it looked like a big bang project, it was effectively delivered incrementally and delivered by an ecosystem of companies, Pfizer and BioNTech, for example, Moderna, lots of different companies trying to achieve the same aims, and it was a bit of a race to see who would get there first. And now we've got quite a few different ones to go from. The vaccine distribution, again, I think it's a really interesting one. and people have voted a bit all over the place. And I think that that one is very interesting to contrast with track and trace, which most people see as being absolutely terrible, apart from one or two people that thought they did great. I think the interesting thing about the vaccine distribution versus track and trace was that track and trace was clearly a centrally managed, top-down initiative using completely new resources. It was a classic Big Bang project. Whereas the vaccine distribution, my wife and I got our vaccines at different places. We got different vaccines, lots of different centers. There was much more of an ecosystem, I think I would argue, in vaccine distribution than there was in track and trace. And then the last one here, which is the moon landing, and that most people think that delivered lasting value. A lot of people think it didn't deliver lasting value. So my contention would be, out of the 10, we've got three projects which I could argue were more incremental than Big Bang. Most of the ones that delivered value, that delivered lasting value, were actually incremental change. And the other two Big Bang ones, the other Big Bangs, didn't deliver lasting value. That's what that's saying, effectively saying there. So couple more questions before I get into some more chat, which is, I'd like your view on whether organizations are more like machines or are they more like ecosystems? And I'd like your view on the way that organizations approach change. Do they approach change as if the target organizations are machines, or whether the target organizations are ecosystems? Hope that makes sense. I'm gonna have a look at the questions that are coming through while you're doing the voting. I don't think anyone, this is value of values. Yeah, I see. That question, the statements on the screen at the moment, I'd really dispute. I'd really say it's a project responsible. If I was the sponsor of the project, I've sponsored lots of projects, and project management is definitely value delivery as part of that responsibility. It's a disagreement. When the expected, my answer to that would be when the expected value is delivered. Let's see how we're doing. Got 13 votes. Can we get up to 20? Okay, so there might be a couple more votes come in, but essentially the view of this group is that organizations are more like ecosystems than they are like machines. And people are a bit midway in terms of, you can see the distribution here of the votes. People are a bit more midway on whether organizations approach change as if the organization is a machine. Results I've got from other groups are more stark, I have to say. And I tend to see that people think that organizations are more like ecosystems, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. And the organizations approach change as if the organizations were machines. So that's quite an interesting result. Okay. So I'm going to skip through these next two in the interest of time. Back in 1993, there was a very influential book called Re-Engineering the Corporation. The terminology re-engineering is quite interesting, I think. And there was another book in 1995 called Leading Change by John Cotter. And the way of doing change that was set out in these two books is still prevalent now amongst management consultancies and companies. And essentially, it's a top-down approach to change with the CEO as hero. It's the first 100 days type thing. And it really says that somebody senior comes up with a vision and then gets buy-in from everybody else to do it. And there's a big bang project. And because that's what CEOs do. But if we go back to the slide that we had before, bear with me. I've just okay, I was going to go back. I've messed up with technology now. I'm going to stay where I am and keep it simple. Up until then, the most influential book was a book that was called The Machine That Changed the World, which was about lean thinking and how Toyota came to dominate manufacturing. And incremental change was seen as the best way of delivering lasting value. And I agree with that. I think that stood the test of time, because I think a lot of the change that came out of re-engineering the corporation and leading the change is big bang projects that said, well, it's really too boring if you're a CEO to be delivering incremental change. What I want to do is to make a big splash, take home my share options and make lots of money. So the idea of incremental change really lost a lot of currency, perhaps until the Agile movement came along with the Agile Manifesto. Can't remember the year now. Not that different, I don't think. That started in software development. So I'm going to stick on the theme of delivering value and delivering value into ecosystems. So what I think we're delivering value into is a world where things are unpredictable at a systemic level and at an individual level. Interdependent groups, individuals and organizations, and where control is limited. So if you're looking to develop, to deliver value into that, into an organization or into a change, and projects exist to deliver change, then one needs to take these things into account. And I'll talk about how we can do that. But I realize I'm talking to a population of people that perhaps don't think that the role is to deliver value. But if you're one of those that does think the role is to deliver value, or you know somebody who you think it's their responsibility to deliver value, then they're delivering into I would argue, they're delivering into an ecosystem, not a machine. And I think the pandemic has made that clearer than ever before, that things are interdependent, unpredictable, and a lot of things are outside our control. Just to illustrate that, in terms of systemic unpredictability, one of the best examples I can think of is China's one-child experiment. As you may know, I think it's about 30 years ago now, the Chinese government decided the population was increasing too fast for the economy to sustain them, so they limited families to having one child, one person. And someone called Mei Fong recently wrote a book called One Child, the Story of China's Most Radical Experiment. And a couple of quotes are I'm going to read it out. So she said, the whole policy was drafted around missile scientists. Was drafted by missile scientists. It was based around mechanical systems where you set a target, then adjust accordingly. Women's bodies were treated like engines. You set inputs and expect to get certain outputs. That's inputs with predictable outputs. are exactly the characteristic of a machine versus an ecosystem. An ecosystem is unpredictable, a machine is predictable. And when she says it was drafted by missile scientists, she's using that literally, not figuratively. The quote goes on, the architect of the whole one-child project acknowledged many years ago that an aging population could eventually lead to problems, but just said that can be adjusted, as if women's bodies can be treated like levers moved up and down. Now, the situation now is that China has an aging population. It's going to be very difficult for the younger population in terms of to support the pension requirements of, there's going to be a massive shortfall in pension money for the older population. And there are lots of men that would like partners to marry as the predominant way of having children in China, but can't find partners because there are so many more men than there are women. And it sends a bit of a chill when you think about how that situation even came about. And it came about because the Chinese government didn't include social scientists who understood that this whole social system into which they were trying to deliver a change was an ecosystem rather than a machine. So that's, you get unforeseen consequences. That's one of the things with ecosystems, is that you get unforeseen consequences. So you have to watch out for unforeseen consequences. In terms of individual unpredictability, this was reported by Daniel Kahneman in his book Noise. It was reported in HBR earlier on. And I followed this up in some radiography journals, which is the same doctor came to a different severity judgment on a breast cancer screening 40% of the time. The point I'm making here is that we as individuals are unpredictable. It's not just that the systems are unpredictable, we as individuals are unpredictable. So that's unpredictability. So now, interdependence. Back to the pandemic, this was a food processing plant in Merthyr Tydfil, and the Welsh government had a very different approach to the English government, and they understood that the thing was an ecosystem in the sense that if they tested people and people tested positive, they weren't going to be able to go to work. So what the Welsh government did was that they made sure that there was financial support in place for the people that are tested positive, so they weren't going to work with the virus because they lacked money. And I drew I'm not going to walk through this diagram, but I just, this is a diagram without any standards whatsoever. But it's just the kind of way that I think about ecosystems when I'm looking at a problem, which is just to try and draw a picture of it. You had this meat plant here, you had a positively tested worker who might interact with colleagues, who then interact with households. Track and trace needed to, people were worried about track and trace because of their legal status, because a lot of the people were immigrant labor, and they feared losing income and they feared being reported to the authorities. So there was a very light touch approach from test and trace in Wales, and critically providing financial support so that people weren't worried about loss of income. My point about this isn't to try and understand what happened in the meat plant, but just to say that there was an ecosystem of things, and to get the outcome that they wanted, then it helped the Welsh government to think about that ecosystem and be aware of the possible knock-on effects and actually deal with it in advance. The last point on this is limits of control. And we just can't control human behavior, and any of the environments into which we're delivering a project involve humans, and we just can't predict how they're gonna behave. And I like Stephen Covey, who some of you may know, has got a really great view on this, I think. And actually he talks not about influence, not about control, but rather about influence. And he talks about thinking in terms of how we can expand our area of influence into the area of concern that we want to tackle. So what I'm advocating is that the environment into which we deliver value is an ecosystem, not a machine. And that means that we're more likely to succeed if we think like gardeners. And gardeners experiment to find out what works and what doesn't work. And they never assume that what worked before will work the next time around. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, isn't this just Agile? Aren't you just advocating Agile? The answer to that is it depends on what you mean by Agile. Agile is one of those terms, a bit like disruption, that's become detached from its intellectual moorings, and people use it in all sorts of ways. Generally in the project management community, people will be talking really about Scrum or Kanban mostly. There is a version in construction called Last Planner as well, which is more lean. But generally, Agile is talking about a product, delivering a product, whereas what I'm talking about is a mindset about the environment into which the product is delivered. And the reason I've put Darwin up here is because survival of the fittest, in Darwin's terms, is what best fits the environment. And in terms of a gardening mindset, it's not just about delivering a product into an environment. It's about thinking before you even construct the product, what is going to thrive best in this environment, and how am I going to help it to thrive? Now, if you've got an agile process that is delivering incrementally, and you're adjusting based on the outcomes that you get, and really redirecting when you need to do, then that's great. That fits perfectly with Agile. But you still need to think about how people are behaving in that environment such that the value gets delivered. Now, what I'm going to do, so the last portion of this talk, I'm just going to have a look at how time is going. So we're just coming up to 7:30. And what I would propose to do next, but I'll take a quick break before that, is if you believe that the environment into which your projects are delivering is an ecosystem rather than a machine, and I see that not everybody agrees with me, and that's absolutely fine, then what does it take to be a good gardener? Now, in the book, I set out 9 elements of gardening. Now, these are not meant to be sequential. All of these are going on all of the time in a garden. And after I've given you this list, I'll pause, because I will use the rest of the time, if we want to do it as a group, to go through and think about how these apply to our own projects. And I'll give you some examples on the way. So the elements of gardening are to plan, to prepare the soil, to plant, to water, to weed, to prune, to stake, to ensure good health, and to enjoy your harvest. At the end of this presentation, I've got one slide that brings the whole thing together. Now, I've got some examples of these, and I'd like to ask you to think about what that might mean for you. And the power of an analogy is that it takes thought processes down paths that you might not otherwise have gone down. And thinking about it in terms of a garden means that the element of ecosystem is implicit in the way we think, because we're hanging the thinking off of concepts that we're already relatively familiar with. I'm going to pause, take this question down here. Prince 2 says the sponsor is well, Prince 2 says a lot of things. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them. But the straight answer to the question is, in Prince 2 terms, It would be, because the business case presumably says that this is the value we're going to deliver for this cost. So that would be delivering the value. Now, I realize I've been rattling on quite a lot, so I'm gonna pause here before going through this and see if anything's been coming up in the chat, and whether anybody wants to raise some questions or debates at this point, whether it's through Mentimeter, through the chat, or jumping on the mic to talk about what I've said so far. So let me just take a pause there for a moment. Morris, is there anything going on in the chat? Because I can't see it on my screen.
So no, people seem to be adding questions in through Mentimeter, but we did get one comment from Diran a little bit earlier on saying most projects that I worked on, specs will change.
Okay.
So I think that was just a response to one of the early questions.
Okay. All right. Okay, so if nobody wants to ask any questions, let me just go through this list and give you some examples to provoke your thinking. So what I would like you to do, you can share it if you like, but what I'd like you to do is to think about a project that you're working on at the moment. As we go through these, I'm going to pause and ask you to think, what would this mean for your project if you were thinking like a gardener rather than like a mechanic? So remember, a mechanic assumes that the world is predictable, that a set of inputs will produce a predictable set of outputs, whereas a gardener assumes that things are unpredictable, a lot of things are outside control, and there are lots of interdependent things going on. So let's go through this. So in terms of a plan, if you ask a gardener for a plan, this is the only kind of dogmatic element that I have in the elements of gardening, where I say, I really think you should think this way. The others, it's how the analogy works for you. But think about your project and think about whether there is a shared purpose and a shared vision for the project. And when I mean a shared vision, what I mean is something like the picture here, which was of way back when the Sony Walkman, and for their vision of what the Sony Walkman was going to do, if you're those that are old enough to remember, there wasn't mobile music in those days. This is the precursor of the iPod, and they just brought out this beautiful picture, which is full of emotion, that illustrated what the benefits were, what the value would be of owning a Sony Walkman. If you owned a Sony Walkman, you and your friend could go roller skating around, listening to music with a sense of freedom. So a vision can be a picture, but it could also be words that brings to life what the project is trying to achieve. And if you can get emotion into that, then so much the better. So just pause for a moment and think about the project you're working on. And is there a shared purpose and vision? And when I say shared, I mean shared by your project team and shared by the people that are going to be affected by it. Can you visualize the outcome? Can you see it? Can you hear what people would be saying? Can you hear what people would be feeling? Hear what people would be feeling. Would you know what people would be feeling? There's a great marketing video from Apple, which is all about the Apple design philosophy. And in the video, it says, the first thing that we ask is, what do we want people to feel? They're talking about phones. Before Apple came along with phones, nobody asked people how they would feel about their phone. Prepare the soil. This is just an example. You don't have to think about it this way. This was when all the exams were cancelled after the virus forced the school shut down, and it became clear that the government hadn't talked to the schools and the leaders of the schools about what they were going to do. So preparing the soil is, what are the preconditions for success? So just pause for a moment, think about your project and think about what it might mean to prepare the soil. What is the soil? Is it resources? Is it people? Is it relationships? So this is the target delivery environment for your project that we're talking about here. Not the running of the project. It's the environment into which you're delivering your change, the environment into which you're delivering your value. Plant. How can you plant well? There was a question just now about the business case. This is one of the things I always look at when I'm looking at a project, which is to ask, how can you test the business case assumptions as quickly and as cheaply as possible? Do you agree that that's part of the project? Because quite often, the business case assumptions don't get tested until the project is delivered. But I would argue that it's part of the project to test whether the project is actually worth doing or not. Pruning. Apple again. Steve Jobs, as you may know, was sacked from Apple at one point, or ousted. And then he later returned to Apple in 1997. And this is what the Apple product set looked like when Jobs returned to Apple. And after he'd been there a few weeks, he famously stood up and drew this diagram and said, we have far too many products. What we want is one product in each of these quadrants. We have desktops and we have portables and we have consumer and we have professional. And what he did was he pruned back quite severely in September 1997 the range of Apple products. Now it's grown since then, but it was really important to have a focus on that. And you can think about this in two ways for your project. You could think about activities that are on your project that are they taking energy away from other things that need to be growing? But I'm really thinking here about the target delivery environment and what's going to need to be cut back so that light can get to it, so that new growth can come along. Just give you a moment to ponder about pruning. Let's have a look at this question. Replanting. The answer to that question is I don't know. I don't know what the role of gates and phases would be. Planting to me means that when a new plant goes into the ground, when a new project is started, or a stage, I guess a phase or a stage in a project, that it gets a good start, that it's firmed in, that it's got good roots, and that it's supported in its early stages. I have a friend of mine sponsored a project in an organization which I worked, and he prepared the soil absolutely fantastically for his project. He sold the idea to lots of different stakeholders. They were all supportive, all the senior people, but the people on the level below were not supportive at all. And so he did the, in that sense, preparing the soil was the stakeholder management bit. But then once he'd appointed a project manager, he walked away from it and left it to the project manager. And he didn't plant well because there were lots of pests and diseases out there that wanted to undermine the project. and he didn't stay with the project long enough to make sure that it was firmly rooted into the ground and really growing well. He probably needed no more than about 2 or 3 months to stick with what was a 2.5 year project, to make sure that it was planted into the ground really, really well, and that the pests and diseases didn't take hold. And what happened in that project was that it was radically pruned back to the point that it really didn't deliver anything like the desired value. I can see there's a question. I'm just going to go on for another couple. In terms of your own project, I mentioned earlier, there's if you work in a Scrum or Kanban environment where you have a product backlist, in lean terms, that's like having an inventory of parts that have cost money to build. Now, from a lean point of view, you start with value and you look backwards, and you only do the activities that are genuinely going to contribute to your project. As I mentioned earlier, in construction now, they have a lean approach, which is called LAST. Somebody, when I said this before, because of my accent, somebody said, is it the LOST planner system? It's not the LOST planner system, it's the LAST planner system, which is a lean approach, which is quite interesting. But for your project, for this exercise, for this time, take a couple of minutes to think about looking backwards from the value that the project is supposed to be delivering, and whether all of the activities and the deliverables in the project are going to contribute to that, and could it be pruned back. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to get this question up and see what it says. Oh, it's the same one as before. I didn't mark it as unanswered, and I appreciate I didn't have a good answer to it either.
Gary, just while you're doing that, can I just give you the virtual bell for 15 minutes to go?
Okay, I'm nearly there.
Okay, great stuff. Just so that we have a few minutes.
No, I'm
to kind of take any questions.
I'm nearly done. A weed. The definition of a weed in a garden is a plant that's in the wrong place. It doesn't say anything about the plant. It doesn't mean that it's not a good plant. It's a plant that may prosper very well somewhere else, and sometimes we simply need to relocate a weed, and that's true for the environment that we're delivering into. Sometimes that the changes that we're making that are needed to deliver value means that people need to be moved around because they're just not appropriate for that location. I once joined a consultancy firm, and it took me 3 months to realize that because the partner had changed, the philosophy of what he wanted to deliver out of his consultancy was such that I was a weed in his garden. And at first that was very, very difficult. But in the end, I realized that I needed to work somewhere else because I just didn't fit his vision. And he and I had a long chat about it. And it wasn't anything personal, and it wasn't anything about my capability. I just happened to be in the wrong place. Now, that may be true in your target delivery environment, but it may also be true in your project. You may have people that are in the wrong place, not doing a role, very good people, but not doing a role in which they prosper. So have a think about the weeds in your project. Have a think about the weeds in your target delivery environment. Watering. I ran a program or project to deliver a derivatives exchange into Tokyo. This is me in my Japanese opposite number. And when I think about watering, it makes me think about this project because it was about watering important relationships. When I first started to do the project, I thought I could run it remotely, and I couldn't. And what I found I had to do was to go out to Japan for a week, at least every 4 weeks, simply to water relationships and give confidence. There wasn't any specific job to do over there. It was really just about talking to people. And one of the things I learned from the project, the thing I mentioned at the top, where we had half the projects weren't going to deliver value, was the processes and procedures are helpful and important, but under stress, processes and procedures often break down. And what gets projects and programs delivered, in my experience, are relationships, and the relationships that are forged between the influential people, including the sponsors and the participants. So think about the important relationships for your project that you need to water. Got a question there. Yeah, yes, yeah. I think whoever made that comment, I think that's going to be increasingly true across most organizations. It certainly is in investment banking, financial markets, whereas most of my experience comes from, although I've worked in other sectors such as food and construction and other financial services. Stake, just going to take a quick check on the time. Stake is about support and constraints. What support do people need to cope with the change? Staking is also about constraints and making sure that things go in the direction you want them to grow. All projects have constraints. I'm going to move through this sort of quite quickly now. Ensuring good health. One of the obstacles to delivering value is often organizational culture and people that influence others. Think about in your project what you need to do to ensure good health in terms of the culture of the organization and how you engineer that. Personally, I've said this on other webinars, I like to seek out the complainers, the people that sit in the corner complaining, beardy, baldy Bob, because they've often got really good points and they often influence a lot of the people around them. And if you can deal with the complainers, then you're on the road to seeking good health. You can't always do it, can't keep everybody happy, but it's all too easy to dismiss the complainers. They've often got valid points that other people are too afraid to articulate. Celebrate success. On that Japanese project I mentioned just before, I come from the East End of London, and I took everybody out extravagantly for what we call pie and mash. It's a particular type of meal we used to eat in the East End. And I got so much support from people after that on other projects, because when we celebrated success, it wasn't a big, flashy, extravagant thing. It was something that was personal to me. So celebrating success and thanking people and making it personal is really important. I can see there's one more question. I'm going to come back to it after the summary slide. So this is the summary slide that I promised you. So this is my view. This is what I've been talking about. I think you may not agree with me, but I think projects are about delivering value, not milestones. That's delivering purpose. The context is unpredictable. It's made up of interdependent groups, organizations, and people, a lot of it outside our control. I believe that if we approach that unpredictability, interdependence, and limits of control with the mindset of a gardener, then we have a much greater chance of success. And as a set of analogies, the elements of gardening, which I've listed there, as thinking tools, no more than thinking tools, no analogy is perfect, is a good way of delivering purpose. I'm going to look at what the two questions are here. I like yes, I totally agree with that. Oh, thank you for mentioning. Thank you for disagreeing with me. That's great. I was hoping to introduce a bit of controversy, and there was more than I anticipated. But thank you for offering to buy the book. You've just given me license to jog on a slide just to say what's in the book. So in the book, part 1 is about whether organizations are machines or ecosystems, then the ecosystem characteristics. In part 1 of the book, I talk about why the Big Bang approach has failed so often, and it's full of lots of stats, and they're down in the appendices. And then I've got part 2 is essentially me telling stories that illustrate how you can think like a gardener and not a mechanic. But if you take away one thing from this talk, it's this slide. And really, I would encourage you, even if you disagree with me, and even if you disagree with what I say about the role of project management, then run an experiment and try thinking like a gardener, and try using this analogy, and try and think about the project that you're running, and pick one of these out and say, oh, I wonder what it would mean to prune, or what would it mean to prepare the soil, and what would it mean to water for this project? And it's just a good way of engaging people with concepts that they're already familiar with, which actually takes you into thinking about things in terms of systems and complexity. That's been my goal here. I think I've got one last slide that allows you to ask questions through Mentimeter. We're probably we've got 10 minutes left, so I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to shut up. Quite personally, I'd love to shut up and invite people to put their hand up, and Maurice will see if you do, and jump on the mic and just give me your thoughts.
Gary, thanks very much for that. That was really interesting. Just while people are thinking about final questions, I think there really is something around, or a discussion to be had around limits of what a project manager does. I think because it is, as somebody pointed out in the questions or the comments, there really is that sort of Prince 2 methodology mindset, where there's a certain point where you as the project manager finish, and then the benefits or the value of the project comes later, and that's somebody else's responsibility, which in a lot of ways, and I guess what you're arguing at the moment, is that's really quite artificial. And if you're going to do a project, it should be about the value, and that's part of the project manager's role.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I was during my career, I went back. I tried to tell the story of like Mad P, which was this thing with project objectives documents and stuff like that, was a precursor of Prince. That I just feel that I see lots and lots of qualifications, and there are now lots and lots of change qualifications. And when I first started in project management, it was about delivering value, and I really fear that the profession is moving away to a bunch of process managers rather than people that deliver meaningful things into the world. And for me, it's a bad thing, and it's a dead end. And I think it will turn out to be a dead end for the profession. And we already start to see this a bit with Agile. And you say, well, what's the role of a project manager in Scrum? Is it a Scrum Master? What does the project manager do there? And Agile is much closer to the mindset of delivering value. It's not quite there, because it's really talking about usable product rather than usable value. But the business community are talking much more about Agile now, in terms of, and they don't think about delivering chunks of software, they think about delivering chunks of value. I can see we've got a couple of questions. Let's let me just, do you have a dedicated role separate? No, I don't. Well, if I was a project manager, I might, no more than I would have a programmer or somebody else. I would advocate that it's a project management responsibility. So whether the project manager does that themselves or they have somebody that does that, what I would advocate is that the value delivery is part of the project. That's my proposition. How will the role of PM evolve in the Agile? Well, I think I was just talking. I just articulated that as best I can. I think that if project managers don't start to think in terms of delivering value, they're going to be left behind. That's my personal view.
Looks like we're almost at 8 o'clock, and I don't think we've got any other questions. So just, I think, remains for me to say, Gary, thank you very much again for talking to us. It was really interesting and thought-provoking. And as I mentioned at the start, keep a lookout for other PROMS-G talks. We've got, as I say, we've got one coming up next month. And a new set of talks coming on from September. And please do just take a couple of minutes once you get the survey, post-event survey, just to fill that out, just to let us know what you thought of this talk and what topics you'd like to hear us talk or put on again in the future. So it just remains for me to say thank you everybody for attending, and Gary, thank you again.
Thank you for giving up your evening, everybody, to listen to me.
All right, thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.